Welcome. Today, the 16th day of Av, the 20th of August. And today we're going to be looking at the third reading of Parashat Eikev. If you follow the morning classes, which if you're in America, they're probably midnight classes. So we were learning today about what's called feminine waters and masculine waters. And we have there a long description. I recommend listening into it, even if you don't normally hear those videos, because you'll get a lot of depth about what we're going to speak about today. So today we're going to focus on something we've talked about in the past, and you'll probably remember this, that when Moses is now recounting what happened with the sin of the golden calf, he actually repeats it twice in today's reading. He also mentions, as we've said before, Deuteronomy chapter 9 verse 21, I took your sin, the calf that you had made, and I burnt it with fire. I crushed it, grinding it well until it was as fine as dust, and I cast its dust into the stream, the brook that descended from the mountain. We've talked about this brook in the past, that this is an additional piece of information that Moses now gives us about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, that there was actually a stream of water going down the side of the mountain, something we didn't know from the description in Exodus. But one of the most important things when we learn Torah is to notice, and even Rabbi Ginsburg has this as one of his main foci. He counts the occurrence of words in a certain area. Meaning he'll say, one could ask, what is the most ubiquitous word, the most common word in Parshat Eikev? What is the word that appears the most times? Well, obviously there are going to be words like et, which doesn't really have a translation into English. Maybe God's name may appear many times. The word ki, because. There's all kinds of words that we expect them to be everywhere. But there are special words also. And it's a question. It's a question that you just have to do. Today you could do this easily with a computer. But he looks at this, what is more abundant in a certain area, and understands that everything in that area is probably connected to this. Now, this is a play on something that the sages called Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava means that we're looking at the same word in two different places, and we're saying the meaning that it carries on one side, in one place, carries over to the other side as well. So it's a play on this. It's not the same thing, because the Gzeira Shava is something that a person needs to receive traditionally from his teachers. But here we're looking at abundance of a word, the ubiquitousness of a word. So one of the things that you notice probably is this is not the first time that the word stream or brook has been mentioned in this parsha. So I'll send you back to chapter 8, verse 7. And there we read verse 7, For Avaya your God is bringing you to a good land, a land of brooks of water, fountains, and aquifers that emerge in valleys and mountains. So you have this connection here between the valleys and streams in the land of Israel versus the new stream that we're hearing about that came down the side of Mount Sinai when the Torah was being given. Now, what do you make of something like this? One is in the land of Israel, one is in the wilderness. They're both streams in the mountains and valleys. It's the same picture, but again, one picture from the beginning of our parsha, from the second reading, is about this type of stream coming down a mountain in the land of Israel, and the other one is a stream coming down the mountain in the wilderness, where they received the Torah. So what can we learn from this repetition of the same image twice? So basically we're doing something like a Gzeira Shava, we're doing like learning the same thing, but we're not learning it just from the word, we're looking at the entire image. A brook or stream coming down the mountain in two places, in the land of Israel and in the wilderness. This has to do with what the point of the giving of the Torah was. The Torah was given to reveal to us God's will. God's will. What does He want from us? That's what the Torah reveals. It tells us this and this is what God wants from you. And this is how we learn all of Torah, that this is God's will. Can we do the same thing for nature? Can we say that nature reveals God's will? Well, we've talked about this in the past, and the answer is no. You can't learn about God's will from nature because nature conceals God as opposed to the Torah that reveals Him. But since God created nature, there must be something of Him that is reflected, that is revealed in nature. So it's not the will. What is it then? There are people who could go out into nature and say, oh, I see that God wants such and such from me. I don't know. I would raise my eyebrow about that. I don't know how you read nature that way. It's not really normal. However, there is something else that I can learn from nature, and we talked about this last week, that I can learn about what God finds beautiful or interesting or pleasurable. So the pleasure, which we said is above will, is actually revealed in nature. You could even say more than that if you follow the Psalms, and the Psalms speak a tremendous amount about nature, and in fact the first part of our prayers every day, what we call Psukei de Zimra, is all selections from Psalms or Proverbs or the other prophets, but mostly from Psalms, describing the multitude of creation, the many, many forms of divine revelation that God showed us through creation itself. Now again, this is not revealing His will, but it's revealing what is beautiful. It's revealing what is pleasurable. When we go out to nature, where usually most people are heartened, they're strengthened, they feel better. The reason is because we find pleasure in nature. The only problem is that nature doesn't reveal that it's the pleasure that's given from God. Nature conceals God so well that you could miss it entirely. You could be a scientist and you could look at nature and search for laws and see the beauty and the construct in it, and yet miss the entire fact that this is part of God's creation. So you could miss the godliness in it altogether. The point though is here that just as the giving of the Torah is symbolized by the stream coming down the side of the mountain, which in the Tanya is described in a very particular way. This is actually one of the most important parables for the Torah. And he writes like this. He says, the Torah is likened to water. Just as water descends from a high place to a low place, so too the Torah descended from its place of glory, which is God's blessed will and wisdom, and from there it journeyed and descended through the hidden steps from level to level in the chain of the worlds until it was clothed in physical matters and worldly affairs, so that every mind could grasp it. Now, what is he saying? He's telling us that Torah has to be like water in order to bring the will down. In the same way that you think about it, like any stream, it collects from the top of the mountain or the top of the aquifer, wherever it's being collected, from the rainfall or from well springs, and as it goes down, it becomes bigger and bigger, greater and greater, until it reaches the ocean. So it collects more and more mass as it's going down. In other words, what this is saying is there are people who only notice the river when it's all the way down by the ocean. There are people who notice the river somewhere in the middle. There are people who notice that it's the beginning of a river even if they just look at the collection of rainfall or a single small wellspring. They already see the beginnings of a mighty river. They're able to see this. There are people who understand God's will from the Torah right away. They just read Torah, they right away understand everything. Some people they take a long time until they understand that God's will is here. The same thing is true about nature, and particularly the nature of the land of Israel. Its purpose in the end is to reveal godliness, even though, At the moment, it still conceals it. But the purpose is to reveal it. It's just a different revelation. So there are people who see God's will just by going out into the not His will, but they see His pleasure. They see His beauty just by going out into the forest. There are people that see God's greatness by just looking at the ocean. But there are people who need to see a tsunami in order to understand God's greatness. There are people who need to see not just a forest, they need to see, the Grand Canyon in order to understand beauty. It's levels of sensitivity. But in the end, nature can serve the same as the Torah, in the sense that nature can also be a revelation of godliness. But as we said, it's just a more concealed aspect of godliness. So really what we are talking about here is the vision of the unification of Torah and science, or Torah and the study of nature. That just as Torah reveals God, nature is destined to reveal God as well. It will also. In fact, the more sensitive a person is, the more, like King David, they go out and everything speaks to them of godliness. And that's a particular skill and a sensitivity that some people have. King David, for all his greatness as a leader, was also probably one of the most sensitive people to beauty. He understood God through nature. And that is one of the visions that we have for this generation. That our generation is the generation in which the divide between Torah, God's revealing of His will, and nature, God's revealing of His pleasure, is meant to disappear. The divide will no longer be there. Rather, we'll be able to learn from one to the other. The river, the brook, the stream coming down the side of Mount Sinai will be the same as a river, a brook, a stream coming down the side of a mountain in the land of Israel, and eventually all over the world. When a person goes to study Torah, he will feel God's will, he understands God's will, he can today, right now, and in the future, and even now for very sensitive people, when you go out into nature, you see God's beauty, His revelation of His beauty, His strength, His power, all the different aspects that are concealed right now within nature, but what will be revealed, and they will become a way in which we learn about godliness, and not just through the Torah. So thank you very much for joining. Hope to see you tomorrow.